Okay, we got our engine sitting on the ground here, sitting on a block, not on the engine stand anymore because frankly I don't trust the grade 5 bolts that were holding it on to the stand, especially since we got to put cylinder heads on and each of those things weighs about 75 pounds, so we don't want to add any more weight, much less any of the other crap that's got to go on there. But as you can see, we got a lot of junk already on here, water pump and everything. I had to borrow the flywheel from the old engine, got to torque that down. Also have the power steering pump and bracket and the crank pulley that also came off the old engine, as you could see there. Over here we got the cylinder heads to go on. We're just waiting for them to dry enough to put them on. And we got our intake spark plug wires, which are actually brand new because I made the things. And another pulley over there, the carburetor, the new distributor that will go on there, which is actually a HEI hybrid distributor. So it uses Chevy technology on a Dodge engine for all you purists out there. I will need to put another alternator on because the alternator died before we pulled this engine. But in the meantime, got to torque the flywheel down, and then we're going to start putting some more junk on this new engine, up to and including cylinder heads. Didn't torque them down because this impact wrench throws about 1,200 foot-pounds, and that much torque is not needed for these flywheel bolts. So I went ahead and just got them snugged down. I'll have to torque them down a little bit later before we put everything together, obviously. Next thing we're going to do is put the crank pulley on. Alright, got the pulley on. Now, I'll go back and check our cylinder heads, see how they are doing. And then at the same time, I could get the head gaskets and get them seated and ready to go. When it comes to these head gaskets, the holes and positions of little pegs on the engine block allow you to not worry about getting them put on the wrong way, because these things can only go on one way according to the water jacket passages. There we go. As we can see, they only go on a certain way. All the water jackets are open. You can see different jackets here. Some stuff is covered, some stuff is not. So yeah, here it is. Same thing here. So next thing, okay, as you can see, the pegs work miracles because they help you line up everything how it needs to be. Hold on, let me get this one right here a little better. Make sure all the holes are lined up, which it appears to be. So now, go ahead start putting bolts in. All right. Well, we did get our new head bolts in, but there's a slight problem. As you can see from these side-by-sides here, these new bolts are too big. They're more than likely, because they are one of those aftermarket brands, these are probably geared for an aftermarket cylinder head. And our stock cylinder heads use these old rusty looking bolts. Well, they're not rusty, they're just dirty. But these are a couple of the old bolts off the other engine. You can see the difference there. And because I really don't want to spend any more money shooting from the hip trying to find bolts, I'm just going to go ahead and snatch the rest of the bolts out of that engine right there. And even though I didn't want to do that, I wanted to try to keep it complete. But right now, I'm kind of getting annoyed with trying to find parts to piece an engine back together from scratch. That also goes for the set of rocker arms that are missing up there, because this cylinder head has them, that one doesn't, and that one has two sets of them, so you already can guess what's going to happen. I'm snatching a set of rocker arms from there too. So I'm going to go ahead, get that off, all that stuff off, and go ahead and try to get this thing put back together completely. Alright, we got the bolts snugged down on both heads. Now we're going to torque them down. And for anybody that has rebuilt an engine or even remotely knows, you know you got to do this in sequence. Normally starting from the middle. In this case, you'll be looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You do it in 2 steps. First step, in our case, from what we read, is torque them down to 50 foot-pounds, then come back with 105 foot-pounds on the final. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Got the torque wrench set for 50 foot-pounds. Go ahead and start getting these in. Might not be perfectly snug, but snug enough. Okay, we got that one. Some of these spots you have to pull the socket out by hand, but whatever. That one's good. That one's good. Alright, go ahead and set this thing to 105. Alright, we're on 105. Go ahead and get it down. Got that one. Got that one. And that one. Last but not least. Alright. That head is down. So you already see what the deal is with torquing heads down. I'm not going to spare you. I'm going to spare you the pain of watching me do that again. So after I get this other head done, then we're going to move on to the rocker arms. Alright, we got our other set of rocker arms off. Right here. Grungy looking things. And got our new push rods. This is supposed to be relatively simple. We're just going to put the push rods in through the guide holes in here. You can see there's a series of guide holes where you put the push rod in. And make sure they seat right in the middle of each lifter. Got to put the push rods in first before putting the rocker arms on, because the rocker arms are pushing up against the lifters. So just get a rough idea what we're dealing with here. Got our rocker arm assembly. It's a simple bar, but unlike other cars, unlike Chevy or Ford, Chrysler's put their rocker arms on a bar and everything gets tightened up at the same time. No worry about valve lash or anything. So you got to kind of be careful tightening these things down too, because different valves are going to be open at different points, meaning different amounts of pressure. So go ahead and try to get some of this stuff snugged down, being careful not to stress anything any more than need be. Throw our bolts in. Just like with the cylinder head, I like to start off in the middle, do a little bit, then start getting some of the other ones down. Again, like I say, you want to try to do this as evenly as possible so you don't run the risk of bending this bar, because you don't need any expensive mistakes. Not really torquing these down hard, because just like with the cylinder heads, you got to torque them down to a preset number so everything can operate as it's supposed to. As you can see, you still have some movement in these things. Some of them that have extra pressure on there are not going to move. So yeah, that's putting the rocker arms on. I'm going to get the other side on and then go ahead and torque the stuff down. Alright, our torque specs for the rocker assembly here is 17 foot-pounds, and again we got our trusty torque wrench already set. Unlike the cylinder heads, we don't need to do any two sequence crap. Just simple torquing. We're done with the rocker arms. So now, at this point, our next move is going to be putting the intake on and putting the valve covers on and really starting to wrap up this whole Our next mess. Area of focus is the intake manifold. Now the intake manifold, just like the oil pan, uses a 4-piece gasket, but instead of rubber pieces on the front and back, we got cork pieces, and then we got a regular pair of gaskets right here to go on the actual intake ports. Now just like with the with the oil pan, gotta glue stuff down. Now some people will say they don't put gasket maker on these cork ends. I do, because I want to make sure everything seals everywhere a leak can possibly occur, because I don't like leaks. So I'm going to go ahead and get these cork pieces down and then start gluing down these pieces as well. Now another thing to make note of on these cork pieces, they actually have a bunch of little holes in them, and these are to actually fit into little tabs on the head gaskets that are protruding at these corners right here, as well as a little nipple on the front and back right here that actually holds these pieces in so they don't move around as you're putting the intake down to keep them in place. So I'm going to go ahead and get some gasket maker on here and then put these down and then start doing these blue intake gaskets. Get these in the tabs. Nice thick gaskets. Alright, our cork gaskets are seated, got a layer of goop on it. Now I can start doing the blue gaskets. test fit everything first. See how everything goes. Which, as you can see, is a simple gasket. Go ahead and start gluing these things down. Alright. Got that down. Go ahead and get this all situated, glued in place. Now, even though I did put some gasket maker in spots where I actually did not make contact with the gasket, it actually gives me some extra stuff to smear all over while I'm getting the other one situated, because when I get it all glued up some more, when I get this intake on, it's going to be sealed. And that was the case when I pulled this intake off of the old engine. I had a good hard time getting the thing off because I had it glued up pretty good. One thing I would be confident enough in saying is I did not have any leaks with that engine around the intake. Alright, get the other one down. I'll spare you the time of watching me put more gasket maker on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead, apply the stuff, get the gaskets on, apply the stuff on the other side, and we'll set the intake down. Alright, as you can see, our intake gaskets are well gooped up, and got our little number right here. Simple little Edelbrock intake manifold. Go ahead and place this thing down, and then start getting our bolts on. Get it seated there. Those. Some of these bolts, because of their placement, require a wrench to get them in. Alright, we got the intake bolted down, went all the way around, sort of like I do the cylinder heads, jumping from one end to another, back and forth, alternating, tightening everything down to try to get as even of a tightened torque down as possible. But everything is down, so our next move is going to be to put the valve covers on. And in order for me to do that, I need to go ahead and glue the gaskets into the valve covers and then put them on down. So go ahead and do that next. Alright, we got our valve covers here. These are actually brand new valve covers. Also painted them. So the gaskets that we have are actually a good quality, I'm not sure if it's cork or not, or a rubberized kind of material. It's not the original cork that you might have normally seen on some cheap gaskets. These are actually pretty heavy duty, pretty thick. They might even still be cork, but they're impregnated with some kind of tar-like stuff, so I probably won't need a whole lot of gasket maker other than to just kind of get a light coating to help hold things down real loosely. I mean, I'm not gonna go crazy like I did on the intake. Just kind of get a little bit in here to help hold it down. I'm not even gonna put anything on the other side of these because it appears like I'm not going to really need to. And these being new valve covers, they're not as messed up as some old ones may be, where this lip here, where the gasket sits, is distorted or warped or bent or whatever. So we just get things down enough to be able to hold it in place for placement, and then we go ahead and put bolts in and get these locked down. Obviously, with the bolt pattern on valve covers, you can only put them on one way. So we're going to put them on that one way. Get that one down, get the other one. As you can see, me gluing the gasket down for placement makes things a lot easier. We're using the old bolts from the other engine, which have these little triangular washers. See, that's another reason why you want to glue your gasket down, because you might be doing a lot of moving around trying to get things situated. And you don't want to risk distorting your gasket. Alright, now go ahead and start tightening these suckers down. Valve covers are an item you really don't want to torque down much, otherwise you will risk distorting the lip, and then you'll be having to deal with leaks all the time and having to use stupid amounts of gasket maker to help seal them from leaking. So you just kind of give them a light snug down. Want to get them snug down just enough that you hear it starting to squish, but not enough that you see visible distortion in the lip. So with that, the valve covers are on. Now we're going to do the distributor. Alright, now for the distributor. And here is the distributor. As you can see, it looks like a GM distributor. HEI setup with the coil on top of the cap, like any Chevy engine you would have known. But the difference is this is a hybrid distributor made for Chrysler. Aftermarket companies actually make these HEI distributors for all different makes of V8s. Get them for Ford, Chrysler, even for 6-cylinder models. So that's what we're using. Now, for future reference, I'm sure most of you GM guys already know, try to get number 1 cylinder at this point on the distributor as it would sit. So just some, I guess some GM crap, I don't know, whatever. But I'm gonna try to match up that same concept to the best of my ability, placing this distributor into its new home. So go ahead, get in here, add the diaphragm in a spot where it we need to be able to swing it around for our timing. Get that back down. wires pinch. More than likely, where we're going to end up being at is number one's going to be right there. Now, again, it's not super critical. The cap is not marked as far as where number one cylinder is at. Our main thing is having it seated and making note of where number one cylinder is at for when we put our wires on, so we can get everything wired up the way it's supposed to be. But I'll go ahead and tighten these little retaining clips down, hold the cap down. I'll put the other clip on top of the distributor to hold it down, and then we can move on with putting plugs and wires on. Alright, again, with these distributors, they use these little retaining clip deals that you just simply push down. They're spring loaded. Push down and lock the distributor cap in place. I'm sure there's a purist out here who's gonna say that I'm committing sacrilege putting a GM style distributor onto a Chrysler engine, but I really don't care. So the whole reason is we're trying to make something that has some good functionality, and you're more likely to get a GM distributor cap and coil and all that crap at your local AutoZone right off the shelf than you would an older Chrysler setup. And plus, the coil on top of the cap setup is a lot cleaner than having an external coil sitting on top of the engine, as was the case originally. It's a lot neater in the wiring, a lot neater in the hardware, or lack of. So, as you can see, I put the clip on top of the distributor. I snugged it down just enough that it's not going to shift around, but still allow me to move it when I need to. Of course, this little diaphragm right here will be hosed up to the carburetor when we put that on. And yeah, from there, we go to plugs and wires. Alright, next order of business on this engine is spark plugs. These were, of course, salvaged from the other engine. They're still actually pretty good, other than just being a little dirty from running in a dirty engine, but all in all, they're still good. So go ahead and get these things screwed in on both sides. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and get the wires put on. And the wires are actually brand new too, as I had to make them myself from raw stock. So we're going to be reusing those. The stuff really doesn't have enough runtime on it to justify replacing them, so we will be reusing all that stuff. So we get these plugs in. Alright, plugs are in. Now for the wires. Alright, got my spark plug wires here. I had actually marked them ahead of time with some masking tape and numbered them to at least try to get them where they need to be when I put all this crap back together. So I go ahead and at least put everything together accordingly. Number one. Now, I don't have any guides necessarily, so might have to make some improvised guides using zip ties. Okay, another thing too, the old distributor that was in the other engine, it's a HEI based distributor, but not like the traditional GM HEI. It just has a little module right here, so it needs an external coil, but that's neither here or there. The focus I'm looking at is the idea that I numbered this distributor cap with the firing order, and of course that will be helping me right now with getting these wires in place. So I could use this and get everything where it needs to be. Number 6, let's see, goes right after 3. The last one, number 7, goes right here. Now, like I said, since we don't have any little clips, I'm just going to have to secure this with some zip ties. So end up putting some zip ties along here and get that all neatened up. Alright, using the zip ties is an idea that I actually learned from watching Motor Trend, watching Roadkill, as a matter of fact. Actually, it was a pretty cool idea that I had to adopt it. So, yeah, shout out to Roadkill. But,
here's your zip tie moment.
Hey, stop stealing shit. But, anyway. Put the zip ties on the wires. They don't need to be tight. Then take another zip tie. Try to make sure you got all your wires lined up the way you want them. Alright, take our extra zip tie. Make sure you got the wires where you want them to be. And string through one and through the other one. Then zip it all together. And you can kind of snug these other ones up a tad bit more. But we got that like that. Take another one. Do the same thing for the next one. And the next one, or the last one on this side. Have it all snugged up. And then, at least, when you get everything where you want it, you can snip everything. Yeah. And there it is. Wires connected with zip ties. Thanks, Roadkill. Alright, with the zip ties on the spark plug wires, our next move is going to be to install the power steering pump and the associated brackets. In order to do that, I had to remove a couple of bolts off the water pump and the timing cover, since they are what actually hold this bracket on. Now, one of the bolts is on the bottom here that I don't need to worry about. The other one actually passes through the water pump and into the block, so I'm going to have to goop that one back up prior to putting it up. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get this one bolt put in, so I can at least get things started. same time, we're going to go ahead and start these other two smaller ones on the timing cover, so we can at least have everything suspended where we need it to be. Go ahead, throw a little goop on this bolt. Don't really need a lot on here, seeing as it's already been caked up after the last few times putting the bolt in. There we got that tight. That tight. Get some of that crap off. Little trick, when you got a bolt that does not have a flared head to it, actually take a short bolt socket, stuff some newspaper in there, and it makes it shallow enough to actually be able to push on the bolt to get it in there a little bit better. Another little old trick of the trade. So power steering pump is on. I'm going to go and grab the belt, slip it on here, and I'm going to get the alternator brackets, put those on there. Not going to put the alternator on because I need a new alternator. So yeah, be right back. Okay, we got our stuff here to do the alternator bracket. Even though the alternator's sitting right here, we're not putting it on. I just needed to cross-reference with some old pictures to verify I'm putting everything back together the right way. As you can see, I had to pull a couple bolts off the water pump yet again, because that is where our brackets are going to go, and here's our brackets. And of course, had to goop everything up again. So I'm going to put all that in here. Start with this one first, because the way I had this situated, I actually had two brackets going like that. So go ahead, get this other one gooped up again. There's enough residue on here that it'll probably seal pretty good. Go ahead, put all of this on here. Hold on, let's do something real quick. Pull this old washer off here. Actually do that on both sides, because we still got old washers out here that we really don't need, as it's extra spacing. There you go. This on in there. But that's essentially how those brackets are going to have to go in order to hold the alternator in, because really this whole engine is just a piece together Frankenstein project of different parts. I had to make things work. This whole setup actually came out of a truck, and there were different brackets and everything, and some of the stuff I pulled off of the 440 that was in there that we still have to go through in the future. So yeah, we just make stuff work around here. That's why it's Improvisation Center, because we improvise. So alternator brackets are in. Now to put one of these belts on, which really are the same belt. And ironically enough, I had to make two belts work for this whole setup, even though stock numbers have different belts for the alternator, all that crap. Again, improvising, making crap work. So go ahead, tighten all this shit up at a later date. But let's put that on there for right now so we can at least know the belt's going right there. So now our next thing we're gonna do is put pressure sending unit for the oil. And in this engine, the sending unit goes right here in this little bitty hole. So I'm gonna go ahead, screw this thing in, tighten it down. Obviously, it is very convenient that the engine is out, because you can only imagine how much of a pain in the butt this would be trying to do this in the car. So go ahead, snug this down. This is one of those things that really don't need to be super tight, just in there. So got our sending unit in, and our next thing that I'm gonna spare you the boredom of having to watch me do is torque these bolts down on this flywheel right here and put the dipstick in. So I'm gonna go ahead and take care of that and be right back. Alright, we already got the oil dipstick in there. Had to do a little finessing to get it in there. It's not in there perfectly, but it's in there pretty snug. Don't want to risk breaking the thing off in the block, so we had to do what we had to do to get it in there. Also put this little hose on right here between the intake and the water pump. And now we got exhaust manifolds, these big heavy iron monstrosities that I need to put on. We got our gaskets right here, and go ahead and get this thing mounted up, or at least get it started, and get all the bolts in before tightening everything down. Actually, we're gonna go on that side. Most people would say, why not put headers on here? Only problem with headers is fitting it. And as anybody who's played with cars would know, trying to fit headers in certain applications is a pain in the ass. So I decided to stick with the regular exhaust manifold despite their shortcomings of being super heavy, because this setup is not really going to be a performance setup anyway.
Boo.
Yeah, right. That's what the 440 is going to be for. That one there. Got one more bolt. Now, ironically enough, even though you don't have to really torque them down, you might think, what if they loosen up? You'll know if they loosen up because you'll hear it in the exhaust. You'll hear little sounds coming from the exhaust letting you know that it's got a leak. So if you do get a leak in the future, you'll be able to address it accordingly. So I'm going to go on, move to the other side, get the other manifold on, and I'll be right back. Alright, got all the stuff together we said we're going to do. Got our exhaust manifolds, like this one here. This one actually had a couple of studs on there to help hold the unit on while tightening up, installing and tightening up the other bolts. So those have nuts on them versus bolts all the way around. Didn't have that privilege on this cylinder head, but we got it up anyway. Got our hose on there as mentioned, the dipstick, and bolts, all that other good stuff. Distributor, wires, plugs, all that stuff. Brackets, power steering pump. Now, at this point, we're gonna be able to get this thing on the crane so we can put it back in. So that will be the next round. Till the next time.